Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. It is obvious to me that the narrow parameters of this debate were not fully appreciated by honorable senators. I just want to make the point that the information circulated to honorable senators regarding the transfer of funds between subheads has absolutely nothing to do with the matter before the Senate. And to correct the record, I heard commentary with respect to funding being removed from the Ministry of Agriculture to allow the supplementation of the three heads that we are looking at, which is the Judiciary, the Personnel Department, and the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services. That is completely incorrect. No money was taken from the Ministry of National Security. No money was taken from the Ministry of Health. No money was taken from the Ministry of Agriculture or any of the ministries mentioned in the document that gave, for the information of senators, information on the transfer of funds between heads. I want to repeat that. No money was taken from Health, National Security, Agriculture, or any of the other heads in the informational package given to senators. Not 1 cent. What we're about today is looking at the transfer of funds from 6 sub-items in Head 18, Ministry of Finance, only. So the only area where money was taken from was Head 18, Ministry of Finance, nowhere else. So that the contribution of Senator Leibler, who I understand kept carrying on about, we took money from agriculture, was completely unwarranted, unfounded, baseless, and without any merit whatsoever. Let me go now to the heads from whence the money came. 0400101 sub-item, contribution to the Caribbean Development Bank. $15 million was not required for that expenditure in fiscal 2021 and was therefore utilized or is being utilized to retire advances from Treasury deposits for the three heads: Judiciary, Social Development, Personnel Department. 0400917, Government Assistance for Tuition Expenses. At the end of fiscal 2020, a balance of deposits remained available in the Gate Fund. As a result, the entire sum allocated for deposit to the fund in fiscal 2021 was not utilized. Now, I would have thought that that was self-explanatory, but clearly Senator John doesn't think so. So that I will explain. As I indicated, the Gate Fund is a rolling fund. So in fiscal 2020, the sum of $435 million was allocated for deposit to the Gate Fund to meet the cost associated with students attached to tertiary level education institutions. However, as we all know, the whole country knows that in March 2020, something occurred called the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of us who live in Trinidad and Tobago, including Senator John, know that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the public health regulations that were published as a result of the pandemic, a number of tertiary education institutions were closed. And therefore, the demands on funding from Gate in fiscal 2020 were not realized. As a result, the sum of $81.6 million, being the balance in the Gate Fund in 2020, was carried forward to the fund at the beginning of fiscal 2021. So the Gate Fund began the year with a credit balance of $81.6 million. There was an appropriation, $400 million for fiscal 2021. And of this amount, when you add the $400 million appropriated
in fiscal 2021, plus the $81.6 million balance standing to the credit of the fund, the amount of money available for GATE in fiscal 2021 was $481.6 million. But the expenditure based on the actual requests coming from tertiary level institutions, because again, in fiscal 2021, the pandemic continued. When I listen to some contributions from members on the opposition benches, it is as if they don't live in Trinidad and Tobago, as if they're not aware that there's something called the COVID-19 pandemic that is still with us. And in 2021, there were a number of restrictions which affected the operations of tertiary level institutions, so that the 81.6 million credit that was carried forward into the fund plus the 400 million made 481.6 million available, but only $400 million was required. So at the end of the fiscal year, there was an available balance of $80 million, which could be then transferred for other purposes, other important purposes, such as the funding for social grants, senior citizens, pension, and so on. But at no time was there thousands of students being denied assistance for GATE. That is just preposterous. So I wanted to put that on the record. All of the requirements for GATE, all of the requests for funding for GATE in fiscal 2021 were satisfied, because we had more than enough money in the fund because of the reduction in the operations of tertiary level institutions in fiscal 2021 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that clears up that GATE matter. That theory that came from Senator John has no foundation whatsoever. The Agriculture Development Bank. I am advised that the $25 million that was allocated to the Agricultural Development Bank at the beginning of the fiscal year was not required. The Agricultural Development Bank granted 747 loans in fiscal 2021 in the sum in aggregate of $102 million. So this theory that the ADB somehow was constrained, hamstrung, punished because this $25 million was not released to the ADB is just nonsense. Let me repeat that. In fiscal 2021, the Agricultural Development Bank made 747 loans in an aggregate total of $102 million. And the money did not come from the Ministry of Agriculture. In fact, the Ministry of Agriculture had more than enough money available to it in fiscal 2021. There was no shortage of funds in the Ministry of Agriculture. There was no effect on agriculture with respect to the non-release of this $25 million to the ADB. None whatsoever. In fact, we ended off the year with more than enough money for the Ministry of Agriculture from the various allocations available to the Ministry of Agriculture, its primary allocation, and also the allocation within the Ministry of Finance, which is specifically for the Ministry of Agriculture, which was used for all of the things that members opposite have inaccurately alleged were not available for agriculture in 2021. This allocation was in the Ministry of Finance for disbursement to the ADB for on-lending to its clients, but the ADB was able to manage its business properly during 2021 and therefore did not require this funding from the Ministry of Finance. Nothing to do with any sort of starvation of money for the agriculture sector or the Ministry of Agriculture. Absolutely nothing. With respect to Community Improvement Services Limited, that's another area where 14.889 million was not required in fiscal 2021 and then became available for the Personnel Department, for the Judiciary, for social grants and so on.
That is simply because there was a court matter in 2021, and the parties agreed with the court that they would enter into mediation so that an allocation had been made in anticipation of an award of the court in this sum, $14.8 million, against Community Improvement Services Limited, which is a non-functional company. It is a company that has not had any active operations now for several years and is now engaged in its winding up process, which includes settling litigation. So in fiscal 2021, it was anticipated that Community Improvement Services would have to make provision in the amount of $14.8 million to deal with a court judgment, but the matter went into mediation, and by the end of the fiscal year, the mediation process was still ongoing, and therefore the $14.8 million was not required. It's not that $14.8 million was supposed to be spent on infrastructure work in communities. I want to debunk that right away. This is a non-active company. It has not been active for years. This money was for a court matter, which was not required during the fiscal year and therefore available for transfer to the three areas that I've spoken about. With respect to other matters raised by honourable members opposite, it's very, very difficult, Madam President, very, very, very difficult to make head or tail of contributions coming from Senator Mark. It's almost impossible, because this is a very narrow debate. It was not open to me to go into all sorts of adventures in terms of the outcome of the fiscal year in 2021, the deficit, the debt management, the revenue for 2021, the expenditure for 2021. That was not open to me, Madam President, under the standing orders. This is a very, very narrow debate. And therefore, it was my responsibility to deal with these items, the 6 items where money was not spent in finance that were then available to retire treasury deposits that were required to finance critical expenditure in judiciary, personnel department, and social development. It's not available to me to go all over the place in an adventure. I am sure, Madam President, that if I had done that, you would have certainly stopped me. And I was very well aware that there should be no mention whatsoever of transfers between heads, because that is not before us. So that it is difficult to respond to Senator Mark, because Senator Mark makes all sorts of statements that just make no sense. So that I am simply dealing with the matters at hand. And that is the number of heads here, the fact that this expenditure was not required, and the fact that this money was needed by the other 3 areas, and that we were able to finance this expenditure, the expenditure in the Ministry of Social Development, very, very important expenditure. We were able to finance the expenditure in the judiciary. In each case, there was a rational explanation. In the case of the judiciary, as we all know, if you've been paying attention, has been seeking to expand its operations over the last several years, engaging and hiring new judges, magistrates, masters of the court. In fact, if one were following what was going on, a significant number of masters have been brought on into the system within the judiciary over the last several years. So the judiciary has expanded its operations. And therefore, even though each ministry and department is required to try and live within its allocation, this is the direction given by finance to everyone. This is your allocation, try and manage it. Try and live within it. We found, as we got towards the middle of the year, that there were some inescapable expenses within judiciary, personnel department, and social development that we had to fund. And that is why we used the mechanism of treasury deposits, which is quite standard, to temporarily finance these arrangements, and then we look for, at the end of the year, whether we had in fact spent all of the funding that we had appropriated at the beginning of the year. So, Madam President, I think I have explained everything that is needed to be explained. I wanted to make the point to Honourable Senator Deora Ryan that some of these items are just not available for movement to other places. I want to make the point in particular with respect to the funding for the ADB, that funding simply was not required. The ADB was able to manage its own business. I want to make the point that the GATE fund did not suffer in any way. I want to make the point that the $25 million that was allocated for the ADB but was not required was not needed to be transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture because we had made available a fund of $500 million for the Ministry of Agriculture in fiscal 2021. And this year we've made available a special fund of $300 million, which is disbursed from the Ministry of Finance. So there was absolutely no need to transfer that money from the ADB to agriculture because agriculture had more than enough financing available to it. So again, I don't want to expand the items that we are dealing with today. I think I have done as best as I can in terms of responding to the relevant questions that were asked by honourable members opposite. I hope I have corrected the record in terms of why we are here, and I hope I've corrected the record in terms of the mistaken belief that money was taken from a number of ministries like National Security, Health, etc., to deal with this expenditure. That did not happen. In fact, in terms of the Ministry of Health, just to deal with a comment made by Senator Diyal Singh, every cent that the Ministry of Health required during fiscal 2021, we in the Ministry of Finance made arrangements to make that money available. Because we consider in this pandemic the Ministry of Health to be number one. So that whether it was appropriated or whether we used loan financing, which is what we do to pay for pharmaceuticals in large measure, we made sure, whether it was to purchase vaccines, whether it is to engage temporary staff, you would have heard about that earlier today, whether it's to purchase ventilators, whether it's to purchase medication, whether it is to provide goods and services to our public health systems, whatever the Ministry of Health required within fiscal 2021 was made available to it, because that is the number one priority of this current government of Trinidad and Tobago. So I just wanted to clear up all of that. And with those few words, Madam President, I beg to move.